Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to another one of our live sessions, our live talks, uh, offered to you by the U.S. Spiritist Federation. This is the first talk of the year, so what a way to start 2022. 22 is going to be a great year because, with all the lessons that we've been learning. And speaking of lessons, today we are honored to have Karen Dittrich. She is going to bring a very, very interesting topic, very important. Hi, Karen, how are you?
Hi, Klaus. Great, good to be with you. Hello.
So,
How are you?
yeah, so you're going to be talking about action and reaction. This is such an interesting topic. Are you sure you're going to be able to cover in just 1 hour, an hour and a half? This is very
Exactly.
deep.
It might take a bit longer.
It's very
Yeah.
deep. So, as usual, we're gonna start with a prayer, but actually, let me introduce you to those who don't know you. So, Karen, she's a member of the Center for Spiritist Studies, Camille Flammarion, NEECAFLA, the abbreviations in Portuguese, in Brussels, Belgium. So, besides the studies and activities at the Spiritist organization, she loves translating Spiritist books, texts, and talks into German. Welcome, Karen. So let's kick off with our initial prayer, and then you have the floor.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity for us to be here, and even though we are far away physically, but we are connected in ideals. We are connected with our minds. We are connected with our affinity and our interest to learn more about the laws of the universe, not only those that govern the universe from a physical standpoint, but also those moral laws that govern our lives. Those laws that bring us the reaction to our action, the effect to our causes. Bless us on this first talk of the year. Bless us all this Saturday. And bless and inspire our speaker so she can bring to us the lessons that we need the most for our daily lives. And may those help us make better choices. So be it. You have the floor, Karen.
Thank you so much, Klaus. Thank you for this warm welcome, and thank you for inviting me. And it's really an honor to be with you and crossing the Atlantic that way. So hello from Brussels to everybody, and a very happy New Year, and maybe a very great one, as you just said. So yeah, let's start the conversation today about the topic of action and reaction, or the law of cause and effect. And that is a very broad topic, as Klaus already mentioned. And I promise I try to stay within the time that we that we agreed, but it's indeed something that you could go on talking for hours and hours. And it's a topic that may be considered, obviously, from different aspects, from different points of view. And we all know that every effect has a cause, so that's a simple fact. And there's this well-known physical law of action and reaction as well, as was formulated by Newton, the third law of motion, that say that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So this is a very rigid physical law and mechanical law, and that's very clear when we refer to matter, right? But our focus today, I'm not going to give a lecture on a physical topic, no worries, but our focus will be to consider the topic regarding our own life, our actions and their consequences, and how the Spiritist philosophy can help us to understand a bit more about the topic and about what Hindus would call karma. So how does this process work in relation to our own situation, about the circumstances in our life, the challenges that we're facing, the differences that exist between all of us. And if you consider all that from the point of view that we are immortal spirits who are on their pathway of evolution to find or to one day reach perfection. And when we look at this topic, do we then also encounter a rigid law here? So when we're talking about our actions and their consequences, is there something like, is it something static like a catalog where we would say for which deed you will receive which consequence, and would there be a set period of time for that? So these are questions I would like to look into a bit, also about asking ourselves what is actually just, what is just. if we compare ourselves to others, and if we look at life as if it would only be this one physical existence that we're living right now, and see that all the differences between us, some people really, really suffering a lot, others who seem to have it easier. But at the same time, we have this concept of God as being infinitely loving, just, merciful. So somehow this needs to work together, right? And this is where Spiritism really helps us understanding life a bit better in our own situation, because it offers us one essential aspect, which is reincarnation, and that makes a huge difference when we look at those questions. So, and one very frequently quoted concept by Allan Kardec that you find, for example, at the very beginning of the Gospel according to Spiritism, and also later in that book in chapter 19, is the concept of unshakable faith. And something that he teaches us is that faith is only unshakable if it can stand face to face with reason in all epochs of humanity, face to face with reason. So someone believes because they understand, because they know what they believe in and why. So that's opposite to blind faith, where sometimes you might try to believe or try to create a faith because someone told us to believe, but we don't really understand it. But what the Spiritist teachings try to offer us is that unshakable faith. Faith is that reason, or that explanation of the laws of life, of the mechanics of life, based on reason. And that's especially important to build that unshakable faith, to be able to face difficult situations, to be able to go through more suffering moments. Because if you understand why we are suffering, it is easier to accept the situation that we are in, and to look differently also at those who might challenge us, those persons whom we might have a challenging relation with. So when many of you will be familiar with the Spiritist concepts, and if you study the Spiritist teachings, we learn that we are immortal spirits, that we have a free will, but that we are also responsible for our actions, right? We can do whatever we wish, but we will be responsible for that. So how do those mechanisms work? How does this responsibility actually materialize in our life? And to reply to those questions, you could take all the basic books of the Spiritist teaching. They will offer a lot of helpful information on that. From the Spiritist book to the Gospel according to Spiritism, for example, in chapter 5, we learn a lot about the reasons of suffering, and also the where it comes from, and also in the book Heaven and Hell, and we will touch upon that a bit later. But there's one book from the Spiritist literature that I would like to introduce here as well, which is called Action and Reaction by the Spiritist author André Louis. Sorry, that was too fast. And written through the mediumship of Chico Xavier. I will not present the whole book here today. I also saw that there was a talk on your YouTube channel by Peter Hayes about the book. So anyone who would like to learn a bit more about it, that's really worth watching the talk to get an idea of what the book presents. And I will focus on a few aspects that may help us when we talk about this question of the law of cause and effect and the consequences that our actions have. So this is the 9th book of the series Life in the Spirit World. So André Louis wrote quite a lot of books. He's a spiritual author who explains us through mediumistic writing what he encounters after returning to the Spiritist world. So it's really interesting. And this book, Action and Reaction, has an introduction by the Spirit of Emmanuel, who wrote and informs us actually that André Louis wrote this book in honor of the 100th anniversary of the Spiritist teachings. So that was his contribution that he offered to that special occasion. So that shows how important that topic and that book is also to the spiritual author, André Louis. And the book Action and Reaction really offers many, many lessons, real life studies or real cases about that shows the mechanics of cause and effect and how our life today is connected to our actions from the past. And I just summarize all I'll quote a few aspects from the synopsis of the book. So to give you an idea, André Luiz spent 3 years in a place or in an institution called Mansion of Peace. In Portuguese, it's Mansão Paz. So this is an institution under the jurisdiction of Nosso Lar that many of you will be familiar with. Right? It's an astral city, a place in the spiritual world. The Mansion of Peace, it cares for suffering spirits in regions near the earth, but in lower zones. And André Luiz, while being there, those 3 years of spending them, he gets to know several cases that are related to the law of cause and effect. And that show us how the present earthly existence is linked to the past life. But also, so this is one aspect. But also it shows us how our actions of today will prepare our future. So, and he presents us some really real-life cases that offer guidance on how to fix our spiritual debts on the law of cause and effect. And also we learn how such reincarnations where we try to fix our debts are being prepared in the spiritual world. And one aspect that Emmanuel is still talking about the introduction of the book that he mentions when he gives us an idea of what it will be all about is that André Luiz shows us really the importance of our physical existence, the importance of that incarnation that we're in right now. Because as he calls it, André Luiz shows us the importance of physical existence as being a true blessing of divine mercy, an opportunity for us to adapt ourselves to the mechanisms of infallible justice. And that's really worth reflecting a bit about. So our physical existence is really that incredible blessing. Because sometimes when we are in the middle of our daily life challenges or struggles, you might forget about that a bit. But it really is a true blessing when we remember our essence as immortal spirits who are here for a reason. We're here incarnate on earth for a reason. And when we say it is a true blessing, this physical existence, and that really means all the challenges, all the lessons that we need to learn, our physical existence with all its aspects. So this is, they have an objective. And if we reflect about it and are able to really internalize that true blessing and that opportunity that this existence represents for us, then it may help us also to look differently at our own challenges, the challenges in our life, and the challenges that others are facing. And that's why it's worth reflecting a bit about it. And so André Luiz is not visiting this institution, Mansion of Peace, on his own, but also he's accompanied by a colleague called Hilario. And they went there in order really to study the law of cause and effect, to learn a bit more about it. And he tells us that this is an institution that was founded more than 300 years ago from the moment that the book was written. And it's headed by a spirit called Druso, a very dedicated director. And so it's a place that receives unfortunate spirits who are in a difficult situation, but who have decided to work for their own regeneration and who need help and guidance for that. And after some time of spending in that institution, they are either admitted to more advanced places in the spiritual world, or they will reincarnate. And so André Luiz describes a scene where the director Druso talks to 200 spirits, which are patients of that mansion of peace, and he talks a bit about life and the topic of action and reaction. And there's one sentence that I find very important to reflect upon. It's called, just quoting him, the objective of life works in us and with us in every possible way to guide us to perfection. And this is actually the objective also of our incarnation, to get a bit step by step closer to perfection. And then he goes on and says, if we curtail its impetus, we act contrary to the law and thereby create affliction and suffering for ourselves. but we see that the cause lies in our own actions. So if we try to leave that path of the actual objective of life, then we create affliction and suffering for ourselves. And as he continues, he says, well, while we were on the physical plane, so while we were incarnate on earth, we believed that death would be the solution to our problems. So no matter what we do, once dead, it wouldn't concern us anymore. But then after passing through or passing to the spiritual world, after what we call death, everyone realized that it's actually a bit different. So as Druso tells the audience, we are indissolubly tied to our own deeds. So there's no hiding from them. There's no running away from our responsibility. Our deeds are our responsibility. So there's no way out of that. And as he continues telling us, our actions weave either wings of freedom or shackles of imprisonment, depending on the type of action, right? And again, continuing, we owe our fate to no one but ourselves. So based on our actions. And as you also explained, that no one can move ahead without clearing the debts that they contracted. Because as he said, I will leave the two sentences here. How can we walk the path of the angels? So how can we move on to other more advanced places while our feet are still shackled to the earth? Because there are still humans that accuse us of wrongdoing, so people that we might have harmed, that we might have hurt, and thereby immersing our memory in darkness. So we cannot move on while we still have what we call debts, but simply not having fixed wrongs that we did to someone. And some very important point also is that what Druso reminds us is that the divine law is founded on inexorable justice and applies equally to everybody. So that's a very important point. There is no one that is treated differently. So we are all responsible the same way. There is no difference, although sometimes here on earth it might seem that some are treated differently than others, but before God, everyone is treated the same way. Which also means that we all have the same possibilities. And when we're talking about the divine law, wondering a bit what is meant by the divine law in this context, we could have a look at the Spirit's book, where in question 614, Allan Kardec asks the higher order spirits what is meant by the natural law. And the spirits replied to him that the natural law is the law of God, and it's the only law that is truly necessary for human beings to be happy. It shows them what they should do or not, and they only suffer misfortune if they depart from it. So we only suffer if we deviate from that divine law, and that's also what Druso mentioned earlier in his lecture. So yeah, well, where do we find that law now? And that's also, Allan Kardec also asked us that when he prepared the Spirit's book. In question 621, where is God's law written? And the question, the reply is very simple, in the conscience, and it's worth reflecting a bit about it. So it's not, the reply is not God's law is written in this and that book. God's law is attached to this and that philosophy, this and that religion. No, it is in our conscience, and everyone has access to it, completely independent of our belief systems and religion, whatever we might believe in. So if we're all treated in the same way, then it can't be different, right? Than having access to it through our conscience. Now, it can still at times be a bit difficult to really reflect about God's law. If we only, if we would only ask our conscience and meditate, I think that would help a lot. But there are other resources also that can help us. For example, the Gospel according to Spiritism, where Allan Kardec explains in his introduction to the book, when he talks about the objective, that actually when we talk about the gospel in general, not the gospel according to Spiritism, but the gospels, they can be divided in 5 parts, as he says. So we have the events in the life of Christ, we have the miracles, the prophecies, then the words that the church based their dogmas on. And the 5th part of the gospel are the moral teachings. And as Allan Kardec says, the first 4 parts, they have been object to controversies, there have been discussions, religious disputes on them. But the moral teachings, they remained constantly inviolate. So no one ever questioned them because no one had arguments against them. And as he explains it in the book, before this divine code of those moral teachings in the gospel, before this divine code, even incredulity bows down. And that's really the common ground. These moral teachings are the common ground where all cults might be united, whatever the creeds are. And Allan Kardec goes on that this divine code is really a rule of conduct for every circumstances in our lives, both private life, public life. If we would only follow that guidance, we would follow the God's law, the divine law. And as he also explains us, the teachings of those moral teachings are the infallible route to lasting happiness. And also a bit, lifting up a bit the corner of the veil that hides the future life while we're here on earth. So this is, as he says, that's the exclusive objective of the gospel according to Spiritism, to present this divine law, these moral teachings to us. And just to give one example, and I'm sure you're all studying the gospel a lot and regularly. If you take the greatest commandment from chapter 15, Allan Kardec says that all of humankind's duties are summed up in the maxim, without charity there's no salvation. And really, the gospel is a roadmap to happiness. And if you would, the more we open the book and reflect upon it, the more it helps us to sometimes get back a bit to the path that we would like to follow, and that sometimes is still a bit difficult. And obviously, it's still at times not that easy for us to follow, to always observe the law of love and charity that we find in those teachings, and to always treat the other person the way that we would want it to be treated if we were in their place. So it's still natural in our position. We all know we are imperfect spirits on the road towards perfection, but here to learn. So it's normal that we still deviate from the divine law, that we make mistakes, although we might not always have the intention to. But what now exactly happens when we deviate from the divine law? How does divine justice work? And here we come to the book Heaven and Hell, so one of the basic books of the Spiritist teachings, which helps us a lot understanding more about that process of divine justice. And that's also what the book says. It's divine justice according to Spiritism. And in the book, we find it consists of 2 parts. And the first part compares several doctrines concerning different topics, like the passage from corporeal life to spirit life, but also future punishment, for example, and reward, not only punishment, but also reward concerning suffering and other topics. And in the second part, which is also very interesting, we find many examples of true situations that spirits or a discarnate soul goes through during and after death. So really worthwhile studying. But I'd like to focus on one part that we find in the first part, chapter 7, which is called the penal code of the future life, because we're talking about the consequences of our actions. But when we talk about the penal code, that might sound a bit harsh, and it might remind us of a God that is punishing us out of just for the sake of punishing us or out of revenge. But when we talk about it, it's really important to remember the objective of the law of cause and effect. The objective is our progress. God wants all of his creatures to progress and reach perfection. So we're here in a learning process, and if we make a mistake, we need to learn not to do that again, and also to fix what we did wrong. So this is the background of this penal code of the future life, and it's important to remember that it's not about punishing out of revenge. And I'd like to just mention a few items that might help us to reflect a bit more about the process. A few items of this penal code of the future life that I'd like to quote. For example, that when we're going back to the spirit life after our discarnation, our soul or spirit suffers the consequences of all imperfections that it could not correct during its corporeal life. And also remembering what Druso told his audience, we are tied to our deeds, right? And also to our imperfections. Complete happiness is inherent to perfection. Only then we will be completely happy. So long way to go, but it doesn't mean that we would be completely unhappy while we're not there yet. But it's a gradual way, as we learn in the book. Every imperfection is at the same time a cause of suffering, just as every acquired quality is a source of blessedness and the attenuation of suffering. So we are improving gradually by acquiring the qualities that we're trying to reach. And also the law of progress endows every soul with the potential to acquire the good it yet lacks, again showing that there is no differentiated treatment to anyone, but we're all being in the same place, so everyone has the same opportunities to improve themselves and also to overcome our difficult tendencies. So this is a very just law, right, for all of us. And perhaps also talking a bit about the duration of a punishment, if we want to call it, how long do we then suffer the consequences of our actions? And Allan Kardec explains us that the duration of the punishment depends on how much the guilty spirit improves itself. And that's a very important piece of information. So no condemnation is set for a set amount of time, is declared for a set amount of time. So there's no 4 years of a certain type of suffering for a certain deed that we did. But as Allan Kardec explains it, what God requires for the end of the suffering is a serious, effective improvement and an authentic return to the good. So, and that also goes back to the objective of the whole law of cause and effect, and the objective of being punished or being suffering the consequences of our wrongdoings. So once we learned and we overcome that tendency, then there's no need to suffer from it any longer. And I think that's also a big difference to that rigid physical law that we talked about in the beginning. So it's in our hands actually how long we suffer the consequences of actions from the past. And important also, repentance is the first step towards regeneration. So first we obviously need to understand that we did wrong. And then the next step is that we also need to expiate our fault and repair it. So that's required in order to really completely erase our debts. And that also reflect a bit more about this. For example, in the book Action and Reaction, there's André describes us a scene where an even higher spirit or more advanced spirit than Director Druso comes to visit that institution. So he's called Sanzio, Minister Sanzio, who is overlooking that institution, and every now and then visits it in order to give some advice and instructions where he's being asked, and he was asked to talk a bit about karma, and explains us actually that all of us have our account before God, before life, with our credits and our debits. And this does not only concern individuals, but also nations, institutions, groups of people that come together. So We have our individual accounts, but also, for example, a people has their collective account and is responsible for collective actions. So he really describes us as life having an accounting system to express these mechanisms of divine justice. And one important aspect that he mentions is that the larger our knowledge and the more we are aware of the divine law and of what we should do and what we should not, the more responsible we are obviously for our actions. And this will be taken into account at everything we do. So our responsible grows with the way we teach, we learn. And that's another difference also to the mechanical, physical law of action and reaction, right? So it's a bit more dynamic when we're talking about our soul. So, and one thing that he says, it's this law works automatically because we are transforming the energies that God's energies on our journey of evolution constantly through our thoughts, through our words, through our actions. So we use that energy, but we are responsible for the outcome of it. And sometimes it's so easy to completely forget about that fact and also to completely not pay attention to our thoughts, right? But they are important. They are through our thoughts we influence the atmosphere around us. It's energy. So our thoughts, words are important as well, and we'll have that responsibility. And I'm not saying that to scare us or to blame us for what we did wrong, but it's just to make us aware again and be aware that we, through our actions and even the tiniest thoughts, we prepare our future as well when we're talking about this law of cause and effect. So summarizing, also Sanzio says that none of us escapes justice because our conscience, once it is awakened really to those questions, and as he says, to the sanctity of life, our conscience aspires to redeem all the debts that we contracted before God. And one important aspect that not only Sanzio but also Druso mentions sometimes is that yes, the divine justice does exist. We need to fix our debts, but in all of that process, we always see God's infinite love. So the consequences of our actions, when we need to pay for them or suffer as a result of them, it will always be done in the most, how shall we say, or the least suffering way possible. So there's always, God always tries to through His mercy to do it in a way that we can still enjoy it, right? So, and to illustrate this process of repentance, expiation, and reparation, there's one example that I would like to mention, an example from the book Action and Reaction, where we get to know a spirit called Antonio Olimpio. It's a quite strong example, but it really illustrates this process very well, how a spirit, when he comes to the spiritual world after having committed, in that case, a grave mistake, how he awakens to regretting what he did and then also wants to fix it. So Antonio had been newly admitted to the institution when André Louise sees him for the first time, and he was unconscious, really in a deplorable state, barely breathing, and under a serious hypnosis. And through magnetic treatment, Druso was present as well, and he actually acted there. Through that magnetic treatment, he awakens gradually after a long time. And when he opens his eyes and is able to speak finally, his first words are really, "Help, help, I'm guilty. I'm guilty." And that's what he says. "I can't stand it anymore, forgive me." And that's what has been in him for a long, long time, but he wasn't able to speak. And when he sees Druso, he takes him for a judge and says to him, addresses him as a judge and says, "Finally, I can speak and I can declare myself guilty and I can tell you what happened." And so in tears, he presents himself and explains what happened while he was still incarnate on earth. And he explains that after the death of his father, he had inherited a big property, or like a ranch, but he would have to share it with his two younger brothers. And Antonio Olimpio had different ideas of how to use that property than his brothers had. And he was so fixed on that idea and really wanted to use it the way he thought it should be, that he saw his brothers as an obstacle, and he came up with a plan. So he invited his two brothers to go on a boat trip on a large lake of the property, and before the three entered the boat, he gave them a drink, a numbing drink. And once on the boat, he makes the boat capsize. And so, as his brothers had this drink, their nerves were completely numbed, and they drowned quickly. And Antonio managed to swim back to the shore and made everyone believe it was an accident, but that had been his plan in order to be the only owner of that property. And it happens like that, so everyone believes it was an accident. He inherits the whole estate, and later on his only son Luis inherits it. So as he says, as Antonio says, I was a rich man, supposedly honest. Everyone thought I was honest, and while still on earth, he tried to numb his conscience and to enjoy his wealth as much as possible, which wasn't really, he couldn't really enjoy it because there was something wrong. But he didn't admit it to himself, and he didn't admit it to anyone. But after passing through the spiritual world, he realized that his brothers were there waiting for him, and they had turned into avengers and really tormented him for a very, very long time. And he got into a state that he described as a nightmare. So he repeatedly always sees the boat, just this whole sea on the lake. He hears the screams of his victims, and says, I'm shackled to that boat and I can't escape, and who can help me to get out of this situation? As he says, who can help me sleep or die? So this is what he went through after returning to the spiritual world. And as this situation was really painful, this Minister Sanzio that I mentioned before, he was present at the institution. He was consulted of how the spirit could be helped best, and he considers his situation and says, yes, indeed, he should receive assistance immediately, and as soon as possible he should reincarnate in the circle in which he had been delinquent, and thereby returning the possessions, returning the land to his brothers. So that was the overall objective of it. But he also emphasized that, according to what Antonio had told everybody, he had no extenuating circumstances to present. So, while on Earth, he had lived for himself, in a completely selfish way of living. He only knew his own advantage, and he isolated himself really in pleasures, and therefore there was no one that on the spiritual plane would, out of gratitude, be ready to help him in his process of regeneration. So he said it's really a complicated case, but we will find a way to help him. And he remembered that, Antonio was married while in his last physical existence, and he had a wife called Azira that he lived with, and a son, Luis, who inherited that property. And Sanzio says, these two hearts, they are the only one that, according to the lore, are values in favor of Antonio, and who would be in a position to help him with whatever is possible. And so he decides to ask for the appearance of Alzira, because she had already returned to the spiritual world. And I will not tell the whole story, because that's also described in the book. So not to spoil the whole content, but so she, through Sanzio's prayer, Alzira was called, and she joins that group there, and Sanzio explained the situation and the plan that Antonio should reincarnate. And she says, yes, I understand that he's in a very complicated situation, that he needs a new chance. He needs a chance to restore to his brothers what he did wrong. So whatever I can do, I'm ready to help him. Also out of gratitude, because she had always been treated very well by her husband. So Sanzu explains that she would need to help prepare Antonio's reincarnation. But before that may happen, first of all, Azira would have to talk to Antonio's two brothers, because they were really transformed into perpetrators, as he says, merciless perpetrators who live on the estate that has been taken from them, and who nourish a lot of hatred against him and also against his son. So first of all, she would have to find a way to make them a bit more willing to help in this whole endeavor and to overcome that hatred. But he says with the help of this institution, this is something that can be accomplished, and which also in the book is being described. And actually the plan was that Antonio would reincarnate whenever that is possible, and shortly after Azira should do so as well, and they would remarry again. And later on, the two brothers that had died in the boat accident would be their sons. And one important aspect, Antonio would reincarnate in the family of his son from the former life, so that he would be attached again to that property. And then through receiving the two brothers as sons in their family, eventually he would be able to return what he had taken from them. And this is the chance that he gets, and that will be prepared step by step. And it's a very so Azira is very touched by that chance and really grateful. And André Luis describes this scene and says it's really touching. And it has really moved him and everyone who was present very much. And he said he felt the immense love of God that laid the foundations of his unfailing justice. So yes, it will be a difficult pathway for Antonio, but he will get a chance to really expiate and also to pay back or fix what he had done. So until that may happen, a lot of preparations are necessary, which we can read more about in the book, and also we find other examples that André Luis describes us where we see the situation of a repentant spirit and also why that spirit is suffering, and what are the plans for a new incarnation to try to move forward and to fix our debt. So I really warmly recommend studying this book, Action and Reaction. And there's another book that also helps us a lot when you're thinking about our own situation. It's called Thought and Life by the Spirit of Emmanuel. And there's one chapter which is called The Cradle that explains our situation when we reincarnate. And I would like to just quote a few aspects of this message, the cradle, because Emmanuel explains to us that except for special missions, every birth that takes place now portrays the past of the spirit. Our cradle in the world is the reflection of our needs. So yes, we are born in very different situations. Some are born into a very wealthy families, where at least materially there seems to be no struggles, but others are born into very difficult situations. But none of us needs to question if this is just or not, if we got here in the right place, or if there might have been a mistake. No, the divine law works really for all of us, and we will find exactly the circumstances that we need in order to progress on our pathway. So this chapter of the cradle offers us many more insights on that. But just summarizing here, really, when we are back in the spiritual world after an incarnation, then we realize that perhaps not always we acted in a way that we would have wanted to act. But also we're not stuck with that. So yes, we do regret what we did wrong, but divine justice allows us a new beginning. So we may get into contact again with our creditors and our debtors and fix our debts. And it's really, as Emmanuel says, the earthly cradle is the reflection of our needs. So that's so, I think that's something so beautiful. And whatever the situation is, we need to make the best out of it. That's what we're here for. And this is the objective, right? To try and progress. And now I talked a lot about the connection between the physical and the spiritual spheres, and regarding that topic, cause and effect. Our current circumstances are based on our past, but also one important aspect that we need to remember, that through our actions of today, we are preparing our future, because it's the whole objective of this conversation is not for us to feel now very ashamed or to blame ourselves for what we had done wrong in the past because of the challenges that we might encounter today, but really also to understand that, okay, this is the process, it's the way it works, but through the way we act today, we are preparing our future, and that depends on us only. And what can we do now if we make a mistake today, if we harm someone, if we hurt someone, if we did something wrong, if we wanted to do that or not? Once we realize that wrong, can we fix it right now, and then thereby avoid future consequences, or is there any way to make the best of that situation? And again, the book Heaven and Help helps us here by explaining us that the only means to avoid or to attenuate future consequences of a wrong is by freeing oneself of it as much as possible in the present life, by repairing it. So once we recognize that we did something wrong, let's take that chance and fix it right now. Because otherwise, as the book goes on, so that there's no wrong left to be more painfully repaired later. Because the longer the reparation for a wrong is postponed, the more painful and harsh its consequences will be in the future. So one more reason to fix what we did wrong right now, and whenever we realize it, right? So as also Jesus taught us, try to make peace with our adversaries as long as we're on the way with them. And it's important in that context that we really try to get to know ourselves, that we analyze our actions honestly. And perhaps also where there's this message by the Spirit of St. Augustine that recommends us to really every evening take a few minutes and try to look back at what we had done during the day, and to us a chance to do something good that we missed, but also if there were wrongs that we did. So we realize really honestly, oh yes, I did make a mistake. We need to admit that to ourselves, and only that way we can overcome it and try to fix it, right? Ask for forgiveness if that's needed, and try to save what still can be saved while we have this chance, while we are here. And sometimes perhaps it may be difficult to communicate directly with someone, to ask for forgiveness, for example. Once we realize that we did something wrong, some time might have passed. Perhaps someone moved cities or countries, or we don't necessarily have the contact of that person. So what can we do then? I think that it may be a start to pray for those persons, to ask perhaps for forgiveness if that's the case, in our thoughts, sending them positive thoughts and energies. So that may be a start to fix that wrong as good as we can, right? And I'd like to finalize with one sentence that I like a lot by the Spirit of Joanna de Angelis, who reminds us that love is always the great turning point in life. And that's, again, yeah, I guess that's what we're all trying to reach, and what's really worth trying to learn and trying to learn to love. So with that, I would like to thank you all for paying attention, for joining us today, and for your patience, and I'd like to continue that conversation with you. Thank you.
Oh yeah, let's have a conversation. That was a very interesting topic, Karen. I like the way that you did point out that it's all about reactions to our actions, but you did provide a positive spin about it. That there also might be sometimes we're so concerned about the past, right, of what we did, but what about the future, right? What is it that we're building for us? So yeah, I did like that point, and when you mentioned in the end that love, the importance of love for that. We have questions, so let's start with our, like you said, let's start our conversation here.
Great.
In search of our happiness, how should you understand action and reaction?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? That's exactly what we're all aspiring for, right? To become happy, and that's also what Allan Kardec reminds us when he wrote in his introduction of the Gospel according to Spiritism, the objective of that book, so to really try and follow those teachings, try to lay the foundations of a happier future, for really trying to learn to love, to do at least tiny steps of trying to do some good and trying to overcome tendencies that are still based on the selfishness that we have been carrying with us for a long time, or pride, whatever it may be. So searching for happiness, I think it's a long-term planning. As the Gospel also reminds us that when we are trying to help someone, trying to be kind to someone, trying to do some sort of good, we already feel well, right? If that was good, that I could help that person and to see the happiness of someone else. So that already is a type of happiness, I think. So that's the more short-term one that I would see. But basically also, if we try to look at life from this point of view, that it's more than just this one incarnation, that it's really, that we're really seriously preparing our future, wherever that future may be, through our actions of today. So it's really worth all the effort to try and overcome our imperfections that we all have. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here at this stage. So that's how I see it. But yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. We have more questions for you. What are your thoughts on the law of action and reaction? What are your thoughts on your action and reaction and the law of Talion? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you for this question. Yeah, the law of Talion. I think it's something that through our past, I mean, really talking about our past, through past incarnations, I got used to that a lot. I think it's still this impulse may still be somewhere within ourselves, that sometimes if someone does something negative to us, we think, okay, at least I'm not going to talk to that person, or I'm trying to treat that person differently. But will we be happy that way? And how will we ever come out of that circle of always having this negative energy between us and someone else who's challenging us? So as long as we engage in that law of Talion, we won't be happy. But I still may say it's the other person's fault because I'm just reacting to what they did to me. I'm still acting, and I have the choice to either show the other side or the other cheek, as the Gospel teaches us, and try to see in the other person someone who's on that pathway just as I am, as trying to learn, to improve, to trying to do my best. And sometimes someone hurts us without having the intention to, but we interpret things in a different way than others, right? Just see it from our point of view. And I think that way we can create a lot of negative energy that no one has intended to create in the first place. But once we started, it's difficult to get out of it. If there's not one in that circle who will say, let's try something different. Let's try to overcome our differences.
It's funny, like Gandhi used to say that if we applied the law of Talion today, then an eye for an eye, then half of the population would be blind, right? Because we all make mistakes.
Exactly.
I have more questions for you. What about those individuals who spend their lives doing no evil but no good either? Can spirits reincarnate with no purpose other than chilling out?
Chilling out is nice, yeah, because we could say, yeah, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm not harming anyone, I'm just here chilling. It's yeah, a nice idea probably, but Alain Kardec also teaches us we will not only be responsible for the wrong we do, but also for the good that we do not do, that we have the chance to do and choose to not to do. So we will have we will be responsible. And I guess when we return after incarnation and looking back at it, and also looking at the preparations that were necessary for us to reincarnate. So there was all this planning. There were spirits who helped us planning that pathway. Then there were spirits who volunteered and said, "Okay, we will be your parents. We will care for you. We will enable you to return to Earth and have the chance of, progressing, redeem your debts, and yeah, just to learn a bit more. And what did we do out of those chances? And I think then that might be a very painful situation if we realized there were so many. God gave us this great blessing, and so many others also who invested in us. It might be very difficult to realize then that we, didn't take that chance and didn't use it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we have one last question for you.
Okay.
Spirits who are leaders in the lower zones normally justify their actions, saying they are fulfilling the law of action and reaction. Can you comment?
Yeah, André Lucy describes some of those situations where we see really spirits that are really thinking they're doing. Actually, they think they're doing the right thing because they look at. Let's take. Well, the brothers of Antonio Olympio, the example that I mentioned, they're not leaders in the spiritual zones, but they thought they were doing the right thing. They were just, they had been treated rough by him and just wanted to pay, an eye for an eye. So they thought it was they were just doing the right thing, and I think that those leaders think that as well. So they haven't awakened yet to the need for us to learn to love. But at some stage, we all come to a point where we realize. I mean, the situation of trying to fulfill the law of action and reaction in a negative way, try to punish others for what they did wrong, taking the divine justice into our own hands. This can take. The situation can last for a very long time, but at some stage we will get tired of it, and even the most hardened spirit will awaken to it. And I remember the story of Gregorio, a spirit called Gregorio. He was a leader in the lower zones. I think it's in the book Liberation that André Lewis describes that, when he for centuries tried to fulfill the law of action and reaction by tormenting others, and also only through a long work of his mom in the spiritual world, who was in a much higher level and tried to help her son. At some stage, she was able to reach his heart, and he then kind of collapsed and realized what he had been doing for centuries, and the wrong he had been doing, and he kind of really collapsed. So at some stage, we awaken for the need to stop it and try to get a little bit closer to the law of love, although it may take a long time.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was our last question for your lecture. Thank you so much for bringing action and reaction, which is a natural law that you mentioned, not only a physical law but a moral law in a sense, and to provide a positive spin to it. Like you mentioned in the end, the importance of love. Actually, thanks so much. Before we say our final prayer, we have some announcements. Next week, we're gonna have another awesome speaker, Joaquin Eleuterio. He's gonna talk a little bit about the Spiritist mission. So that's going to be next week. So stay tuned for another interesting lecture like the one that Karen just provided to us. And also the U.S. Spiritist Federation, it will be providing a series, actually an introductory course to Spiritism. So we need to always be studying, always learning new things. So it's also going to be offered by U.S. Spiritist Federation as well. So more coming again. 2022 is going to be a great year with all our lessons that we learned, and just like Karen mentioned, right, looking ahead, right, like Karen, we're looking ahead with based on what we've learned. On that note, I'd like for us to close our lecture today. This moment of reflection, and us to think about the importance of action and reaction. Oh, there you go. Thanks for watching. Tune in for Saturday. Karen, I made a boo-boo. You're the ones who are gonna say the final prayer, not me. Well, I got carried away. You got me so excited that I just jumped in.
I don't mind doing the prayer, and I really enjoyed.
You were so pleasant. Why don't you say the final prayer? And again,
no, I'm not trying to shy away, but it's just been so natural. So thank you so much, Klaus, and thanks everyone for joining and watching. Thank you for your questions, and let's try to stay connected a few more moments and express the gratitude for having this opportunity to reflect together about the law of action and reaction, about the law of cause and effect, of what lies behind the situation, the circumstances in our lives. I'd like to thank God for the opportunity of studying these topics through the Spiritist teachings that help us so much to understand the laws of life, and also to try to understand the pathway that we should follow, the objective of our incarnation. And I also like to express my gratitude to the mentors of the United States Spiritist Federation, to all our friends who have been with us today, and for the opportunity that we have to come together, no matter where we might be physically, and learn together. Lord, I'd like to ask for your blessings for all those who are going through difficult moments right now. Might everyone receive this embrace of fraternal vibrations. And may also those who are going through difficulties feel that they're not alone, and that all of our struggles are temporary, and that we may prepare a better future for ourselves. Thank you for this opportunity, and may your peace be with all of us. So be it.